think what Precious said exactly was, how multi-generational Q Hub is, and I think that that's the vision that everyone involved has carried with it, and which is why we're so honored to begin our program tonight with Ginger Valdez and Julio Rodriguez. Clap, clap, clap. So the first person that I'm going to bring up is Julio Rodriguez, and he'll come up in a second. But I did want to first, obviously I have personal connections with all of our guests tonight, so I can babble and tell you stories about them, and that's why, in large part, I'm just honored to sit here and, like Precious said, their work has allowed for me to have my moments and for you to have your moments. So Julio Rodriguez is a co-founder and board president of ALMA. For 26 years, Julio Rodriguez has been active in Chicago's LGBT community. I want to say that again. For 26 years, Julio Rodriguez has been active in Chicago's LGBT community. Most people would know Julio from ALMA, the Association of Latino Men for Action, whose name has changed in recent, and he can tell you all about that tonight. But he has also done a lot for Horizons Community Center back when it was Horizons, and it's now the Center on Halstead, the Midwest Hispanic AIDS Coalition, the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. He was involved with Diego, the National Latino, Latina, Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender organization at one point. And then at one point in the early 90s, Julio lived in Washington, D.C., which I didn't know until recently, and was part of Enlace, a group of LGBT Latinos and Latinas, where he served on as their board. So please give a loud, crazy welcome to Julio Rodriguez. And Julio and I will share the mic, so we'll have to play on our signals, on our our friendship to let each other know when it's one diva, one mic. Okay. So, in bringing Julio in here, I think that most people know that everything that I just said, right? And so we're talking about up until that point. And so what we're talking about tonight is really, how does Julio get to be the activist for 26 years? Like, what triggers or what are the things that are happening in his life that make him the Julio that we know today? So those are the things that we don't know, that some of us don't know. I want to start there. So I just want to, if you want to say something before we get going and crying and laughing and doing all that Oprah moment.
Well, first of all, I think what I want to do is thank you all for honoring me by having me be here. Because the reality is, I'm a product of this community. Whether it's Latino, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's old, young. I mean, I wouldn't be in this chair if I didn't have this community that gave me the kind of support that brought me here. But I also would be remiss if I didn't recognize, ooh, this is live TV. Anyway, if I didn't recognize people that are also not only my peers, but also people that I love and I respect. And Robert Castillo, Yvette and Mona, many of you know. My fellow past board members, Roberto and Jorge back there. My fellow board member now, Lando. One of our scholarship recipients, Oscar. I'm always calling him a different name. And then Moises over here, one of my close friends. Luis, who's one of my more recent friends. And Lando over there, and Lalo. And you can tell I'm nervous because I'm like screwing up everybody's name, right? If my mother was here, I would get her name wrong. I know, right? Well, that's true. But I say all of those things, and I recognize those people because one of the things that got me started as an activist was the lack of recognition. When I first came out, I remember going into bars, and so this will really scare you. So I would get to a gay bar at 8 o'clock at night with all of the people who were working the back bar. Because when I was first coming out, my introduction to the club scene was straight bars. And straight people drink early. Gay people drink late. And I remember the first bar I went to was this place called Broadway Limited, and only a few people in this room will know that place. And I remember so this is really going to scare you about the fashion trends, although they're coming back. I was wearing a leopard shirt with the tightest black pants that I could find. And when you see Ginger's boots, I was wearing, I think, those boots. And I remember sitting at the bar, and I should tell you, I never drank because I was just one of those, I don't know why, it was kind of crazy. But I was sitting there and the bartender looked at me and he goes, "Are you my bar back?" And I said, "Of course I'm not your bar back." And I go, "But he was cute." And I said, "Well, I could be though." But you know, I sat there for 3 hours before the first queen walked in the door. And he just goes, "You're not going to do this again every Friday night, are you?" And I said, "Well, I do get a good seat." So my first real introduction, though, as the bar filled up, and I should tell you, this is about would have been the early 80s. The bar looked like this room. All the colors you see here, all the different ethnicities, men and women together, that is what has disappeared in our community now. And that's why I continue to be an activist, because we need to go back to the times when we were all together. But since you asked me that question about also what made me an activist, so I'm a product of an immigrant family, even though most people don't think of Puerto Ricans as immigrants, but we are. And in some ways, we're the lost immigrants, because in some ways, our status makes us even less sense of a country, because we sit in a status that really means to some people that we are transients forever. And so my dad taught me that the island of Puerto Rico really is an island because it sits in the ocean of politics. And so early on, I learned about the fact that, yes, let's stand for that, because Puerto Rico needs to claim its home. And so, but I think what was also kind of important to me as I learned about sort of who I was from an immigrant family was I also learned early on my privilege. So as a man who came in a household with 2 sisters, as a Puerto Rican who could speak English, and as people would always say to me, "Wow, you really speak English like with no accent, you know? And you articulate so well." I remember thinking at one time how much of a compliment that was. What I didn't realize is what it did was it served to separate me from my community. It was about creating a classism that continues today. But it also taught me about the fact that it gave me access. And I realized early on, and I should tell you, neither one of my parents went beyond a 5th grade education, but both of them were very, very smart people, because they gave me the love and the courage to succeed, and they also trusted me. So for most of my early childhood, I signed my report cards. I signed all the kinds of permission slips. I managed our family's life, but I did that because of the trust that they had in me. And actually, quite frankly, when I think about what makes me an activist, it's not so much the anger that I have, but the disappointment that I see in the people that feel left out. And so I have always made it my life's work to make sure that I created a space. And in fact, Alma's mission was about creating a safe space so people can be who they want to be. So that's how I started. I know he's going. That's not what you said.
And I'd like to thank, just kidding, Julio. So take me back to the first time that there was, the first time, because people keep saying they're the first, and we've had this conversation, and it's not about being the first, it's about honoring those people who were the first. But take me to the time when there was an LGBT contingent in the Puerto Rican parade, and this is a big moment in your coming out, and why?
So most of you are familiar with the Puerto Rican parade, right? Yes? So the Puerto Rican parade has this whole process, and my dad has been very active in the Puerto Rican parade committee. And so a group of us, and it was not just Alma, it was actually Amigas Latinas and other groups that had kind of been less formal, but yes, let's give applause to those organizations. Because, you know, our sisters are what make our brothers great. But I think what was interesting about that experience for me personally is because my dad was involved with that committee, so when we requested because you have to go through a whole application process, they lost the application a couple of times. And I actually found out later it was because a woman who was the secretary, every time she got it and she read what we were, she would just get rid of it. So I actually had my dad intervene, and then that's how we were able to march. And you would think that was kind of a big kind of deal, but actually the big deal was the Saturday that we were and we were downtown, we weren't even in the hood. We were just downtown. And so there were about 30 of us that gathered, and while 30 doesn't seem like a lot of people, in the early 90s, getting 30 Latinos without alcohol to come together was quite a trip. And you all know what I mean. So, adult strippers of either sex. So I think what was fascinating is, and I should tell you that some of you don't know him, but you should Google him. There's a gentleman who was a police officer and then a state rep. His name was Larry McKeon. He was the first public official to support a gay Latino organization, and he was there. The other person you should know was an Argentine woman who works for the Department of Public Health, Chicago Department of Public Health, and her name is Esther Chamalera. She's crazy, but she was there that morning too. And the reason I bring them up is sometimes we forget who our allies were, and sometimes we don't acknowledge them, and they're part of our history, because it's with their support that we also move forward. But that morning, I remember looking and seeing all the floats and thinking, oh, there's all those big floats, and here we are, right, where everybody can touch you. And thinking, okay, this is gonna be, we pulled out the banner, and I remember, and I was with a young woman by the name of Juanita Crespo. Juanita, yeah. And Juanita and I were, we were chatting it up, and we were like, oh, this is gonna be hot, cool, we're gonna be great. We're gonna just put it right in their face, and our community is gonna see us. And then I remember looking up, and there was my dad, and I looked at where the float was gonna be in comparison to where we were gonna walk, and he was right behind us. And I had remembered about a week before I had said to him, Papi, this is when I walk, you will be walking with me, and every person in our family will come out today. And of course he looked at me and goes, pero yo no soy gay. I said, no, I know. But, so then we had to go through the whole explanation of that, And if you know a Puerto Rican father, he's like, pero yo no lo entiendo, Está loco mucho. Yo no soy pato. That was it. So, and he just said to me, he goes, okay, I got it, babe. So he said to me that my biggest fear for you is not that you're going to come out. It's that this community that has supported our family may not support us as we support you. And that weighed heavy on me. I didn't think so, because we were like, fooling around. But as we lined up and we got ready to make that turn, and I can tell you, because I looked right over at Juanita Crespo and I said, so Juanita, once we turn, that's it. You don't go back. And she looked at me, she goes, girl, I know. She goes, I'm ready to go. And we both looked around, and of the 30 people, there were maybe 10 people left that would, because as you get ready, and this is what I always say to people even now, that process of coming out is so personal. And for Latinos, I firmly believe, and in fact I believe this for people of color, and for some ethnic whites, you bring your whole family. So the decision you make is not just your own, but it is one for a whole community and for the people closest to you. And so I remember thinking to myself when I made that turn, That's what I was planning to do. I was about to bring everyone who I loved and cared for with me down that street. But I will tell you, those first few of us that did it, when it was over, it was magnificent.